Good morning and welcome to this morning's Knowledge Bag, returning to the workplace after COVID-19. Today's webinar is in association with JPC and Open Solutions. You will have the opportunity to submit questions throughout the session, so please submit them via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible at the end. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back this afternoon should you wish to watch it again, and also for anyone that could not join us live this morning. I will now hand you over to Jonathan Green, Senior Associate at JPC, who will introduce today's session, and our lovely host. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jonathan Green, one of the solicitors at JPC. I'll be moderating today's session on returning to the workplace after COVID. I, for one, am really looking forward to everyone being back in the office. So this webinar couldn't have been better timed for the do's and don'ts for employers. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen, and the speakers will do their best to answer any questions or follow up with you after the webinar. Okay, so lockdown restrictions were lifted on the 19th of July, but I think it's clear from the reaction to this final stage from many businesses that people don't necessarily agree that all restrictions should be lifted quite yet. And many businesses have made it clear that they still intend to keep some restrictions, such as the use of face masks and social distancing, at least for some time. Many would agree that it's necessary to start getting people back to work, whether that be office or customer-facing roles. It's only natural that some employees, including those in senior roles, will have some anxiety about returning to work. And this is something that all employers will need to be aware of and will need to address. Okay, so what we're going to cover this morning. In today's webinar, we will be considering some of the challenges that employers will face over the coming weeks and months ahead, which will include employees who refuse to return to the office, hybrid working, what it may look like and how it may work for your business and for your employees. We'll discuss the pros and cons of those for both sets of employees and employers, the steps to take and the policies that you'll need to have in place. We'll also consider whether hybrid working could be a springboard for future growth, utilizing new technologies, adapting leadership and management styles, and the impact on your organization's culture. So we'll also have a look at flexible working requests, how to manage employees with long COVID, if unfortunately that happens, employees going on holiday and the need to quarantine with the color-coded system that everything's in place, and also the impact of employees self-isolating and the rise of the Pingdemic, as it were. So today's format is that I will ask our speakers a number of questions, which we've pulled together from conversations and queries raised by clients and contacts. So we have two impeccably qualified speakers to help us today. So our speakers today, the first one is Julie Edmonds, who heads up the employment team at JPC and brings more than 15 years experience in advising both businesses and individuals in a broad range of matters. Julie's experience includes advising businesses of all sizes and stages, from startups to more established companies and firms across numerous industries. She works closely with our corporate and commercial department as well, particularly when clients are buying or selling a business. So she's perfectly placed to kind of answer and deal with some of these wide range of points in respect of returning to the office. And our second speaker is Patrycja Maksymowicz, who runs a consultancy business and has gained considerable leadership and management experience, supporting the growth of organizations via the development of communication strategies, reviewing and implementing processes to enhance their efficiency and accuracy of the management processes, improve customer satisfaction, maximize staff retention, and secure contracts with market-leading organizations. Her particular interest is how to capitalize on technology to facilitate growth in a business, which is obviously a key area when we're talking about some of the issues that returning to the office with COVID kind of brings up. So welcome, ladies, and thank you both for offering to speak today.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get going. First question, Julie, this one's for you. Many employees have enjoyed working from home over the last 18 months. Got to say, personally, I have at times as well. The first problem employers might face is dealing with employees who refuse to come back. So what would you advise, or what can an employer do in that situation?
Great, thank you, Jonathan, and good morning, everybody. I think this is something that will crop up, and I think everyone's experience of how the pandemic has affected their working life is different, and everyone has reacted in different ways. So obviously the rule to work from home has now ended, and the Prime Minister said he expected there to be a gradual return to the workplace. But I think we all need to be aware that there will, for some people, be some anxiety about returning to work, whether that be purely just using public transport, whether it's the setup of their office. So I think that the main thing to take away is be aware of those issues, and just have those discussions with people. Infection rates are still high. People will still be understandably nervous about coming back to work. So I think the main thing to think about is engage with your staff, agree what that plan will look like coming back to the office, because ultimately, if somebody's place of work in their contract is the office, then you're entitled to say your job needs to be done in the office. So we need you back to the workplace. If people are anxious, then I think have that discussion and explain what have you done to make the office COVID secure, what risk assessments have taken place, and share those with your staff so that they can see what's been done and they understand what precautions are in place. And then what you will also need to do is think about particular sort of categories of employees who may have additional protection. So in particular, somebody who might have a disability. Obviously, as an employer, you have a duty to consider reasonable adjustments to their role, and that may be extending somebody working from home or adapting to different hours. But those are discussions that you need to have. So I think the main key from this really is to have those discussions and speak to people, explain what's been done, explain why you need them back in the office, and obviously the benefits of having people back, because as Jonathan said, there are great positives to being at home, but it's great to be around people in the office too.
Thank you. So the next question that I've got is, many organizations have started to consult and talk to their employees about returning to the workplace, and the concept of hybrid working is one that's commonly brought up, as well as a combination of splitting employees' time between the office and working from home, which we've had consultations and lots of conversations in our firm as well. So, even in our firm, we've had discussions about hybrid working, flexible working, agile working. All these terms kind of get thrown out, and it's all quite confusing. So quickly, before I pass this one to the speakers, could I ask everyone, or the people watching, if everyone could just put in the chat box maybe a yes or no, if this is something that, like similar conversations that you've been having with your business, whether you've thought about when you're implementing with staff, in terms of consultations and exploring these kind of options. If everyone can just put like a yes or no, just so we can kind of gauge the room in respect of that. Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, for getting involved. So what do you think are the pros and what could be the issues or challenges to watch out for, including employees working longer hours and the difficulty of separating that home and work life when you're working at home?
Yes, I mean, I think from my point of view, when a business is considering hybrid working, I think let's talk about what hybrid working means. There's no set definition. It could mean working from home rather than the office. It could mean different hours to accommodate, obviously subject to business needs, but to accommodate somebody's personal life more. So that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the office. I think one of the big supermarkets said that people can work wherever's best for them. So whether that's in the head office, in a store, at home. So I think that's the idea sort of with hybrid working, whilst as an employer, obviously, thinking about how you're going to maintain that culture within your business when people are remote, because I think that there are ultimately things that you lose when you don't have that sort of physical proximity to people. And for managers, I think that means you're going to have to work harder to make people feel like a team and to keep them engaged. So there's lots of things that can be done, obviously regular meetings and contact, and obviously the skills and technology that have advanced over the pandemic, I think will certainly be something that Patrycja will talk about later. But I think those are all the things that have helped us to make this an option really sort of for businesses. So in terms of the pros and cons of what hybrid would look like for your business, I think my view is the pros and cons depend whether you're asking the employer or the employee the question, because everyone has a different priority. So for an employee, the pros are certainly a better work-life balance, a reduction in commuting time. I certainly have noticed that myself. It's a cost saving, it's a time saving. We've obviously got the new flexi season tickets that have been introduced, but I think anecdotally, I think there's some comment that they're probably not actually that much cheaper for people. So I think we reserve judgment on whether they're going to really be the shining light for hybrid working going forward. But from working from home, you've potentially got less distractions and more IT skills that I think people didn't even know about. I mean, who'd even heard of Zoom before last March? I certainly hadn't. So from an employee's point of view, the negatives though of home working or hybrid working could be that sense of isolation, being away from colleagues. And we're all fully aware of the impact that can have on somebody's mental health. And I think that was an issue that was already being discussed pre-pandemic. And it's something that really does need to be considered now as well with people working remotely. Your employees will have different home setups too. So not everybody will see home working as a great opportunity. If some people are in a shared house, and this might be more likely to be your younger employees, they might not have a dedicated office or area that they can work comfortably and be able to concentrate properly. So for them, that idea of working from home might not necessarily be a positive. And obviously we've all got the issues of internet connection and those reliability issues that are something that everybody has to deal with every day. So when we're thinking about what an employer would see as the pros and cons, I think certainly the pros for an employer is that it's much easier to keep everybody safe if they're at home and they're not mingling and coming into contact with more people at work. There are reduced property costs potentially, and I think it's an opportunity for employers to really think about what you use your office for. That there are suggestions that if you're going to use a hybrid model going forward, what you might do is actually use those days that people are in the office to really plan meetings, to be more collaborative, and to use that opportunity to be around people. The cons, obviously, for an employer are that you lack that oversight over your staff. Obviously, trust is a huge issue and something that you would hope has built up over the year, and people have demonstrated that it can work. But the risk is that employees see working from home as a right, and that's not necessarily, or certainly not automatically the case. So for an employer, you need to think about, can people still be productive? Can they work safely from home? And what time and resources will be involved in implementing hybrid working? Because done correctly, it's going to be quite a detailed process for you in lots of ways, just from the both practical things like IT and making sure that people have the right chairs and desks at home to be able to work, but also the actual sort of policy side of things.
Yeah. Julie, you covered quite a lot here, but just touch on some of the points. I think wherever we go in the media, even on the LinkedIn feed, we can see a lot of voices, both from the employer's side and the employee's side, and a lot of pros and against, like, I don't want to go to the office, I'm fine at home. So people have changed their lives. Many people, like even myself, I mean, I left London, I'm in the countryside up northeast, and those changes, some people could allow those changes in their lives. For some, it might have been much more difficult if they're working for someone, but obviously that needs to be, those voices need to be heard. I think it's not that we leave the ultimate power to decide for the employees how we are going to work, but I think for the employer, what it gives is the opportunity or that power to make themselves more attractive by listening, by hearing, and then by trying to find that balance between the needs and wants of their people and the goals of the company. It's not just, what resources we have and how we can organize that, but also where do we want the business to go, and having that growth of the business in mind, and balancing that, looking at it this way might be the right way. Also, I think while working with clients before, I could tell that many companies actually quite often neglect the culture aspect within the business. And we know that, if in the end culture affects the people that are in the business, if they are not feeling cared for or listened to or heard, then it kind of translates into the relations with the clients, into the targets that they hit. So that's something that definitely, if someone has been neglecting or had been neglecting that culture aspect in their companies, COVID introduced a wonderful opportunity to actually revisit that by redesigning the processes. You're building basically everything almost up from the scratch. Looking at it maybe in a bit of a more different way, and trying to see the people, not just the business and the numbers they generate. So I think that balance between the needs and goals. Now, obviously, they need to be heard. If you haven't decided on the right model yet, I would suggest, depending on the size of the company, and if your employees are still working from home, maybe running some surveys, trying to figure out what the temperature in the room or in your offices, or home offices, is, and asking even like, what would the ideal word or work word look for you? Obviously not promising that it's going to happen, but then trying to find something that, can we do it? Maybe something similar to that. Now, how to do that? It's like I said, it can be a conversation. It can be, an anonymous survey, and then try and design the process and the model. I think some of the questions that employers might ask themselves is, if I decide, because we hear about the banks, some of the companies saying that, well, they will sort of like combine both models, more, working from virtually, some employees being in the offices. Some companies are just saying like, no, this is not happening. This is not the model. Everyone needs to be back. So forcing the employees. Now, I think the questions that come to mind and maybe are worth considering are, am I going to be a less attractive employer if I invite everyone back to the office? If we don't offer that flexibility, am I going to lose the talents? Or am I going to lose the opportunity to get the new talent that I had not been opened to before COVID? I mean, I recently spoken to someone who works for the outsourcing company in the London headquarters, but they have branches across the world, around 4,000 employees around the globe. And what I heard is like, everyone, they basically closed down all the offices. Everyone is working from home. All 4,000 employees, doesn't matter what level, they are allowed to work from anywhere they are in the world. Now, what that opens up is for the companies to perhaps open up to a talent that they had not considered. Someone in Ukraine, someone in, I don't know, Brazil. If we need someone to do the job, we don't necessarily need to look for them, where we are geographically located. So I think going beyond those physical locations, it may be a challenge, but it also may bring new opportunities, which attracts new talent, opens up to new, but also means looking at the way you're going to design work. I myself work in a startup with 45 teams across 4 continents, for example, where you need to take into consideration different time zones for meetings. So it's like redesigning everything to make it work. So those challenges, the opportunities, and what they bring is also constant redesign of the process, and think like, can we actually afford that? That's an opportunity that may open up to new clients, maybe also abroad. I see companies more willing to collaborate, to work with or partner with companies not necessarily from those cities as they used to before, but then it means that people perhaps work around the clock, perhaps the schedules are different, and using this physical location, like Julie said, maybe not looking at it like it's going to be the office, but more like a hub. I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes. It's in, I think, in one of the next questions, but yes, that's sort of like looking at the office as not necessarily the way we used to look before. And to make sure that those employees that are working from home are, because we talked about the hours and very often just taking that longer after 6 and checking emails at 8 while having dinner. And at the beginning, everyone just kept doing that. At some stage, you realize like, well, I'm giving too much of my time, or maybe I'm not giving enough time. I don't know. I think checking that temperature with everyone, if we ask on a Zoom team meeting, everyone like, guys, are you okay? How are you feeling? They might not say. Maybe a phone call just now and again to like, hi, how are you doing? So kind of like trying to substitute that coffee machine chat or that like lunch break chat by simply giving someone a mobile call and on a mobile in a traditional way, or checking with them in one-to-one, not in a group, and trying to hear what's sometimes not heard.
It's far more informal then, isn't it? And people are more likely to open up. I think that's the key, and I think it's being aware of people, and not everyone is comfortable to say, I'm not coping, I need help. So I think it's incumbent on managers to look out for those warning signs where people might be struggling, and I think that's that exactly. taking that conversation away from a formal meeting, I think does help. Yes,
I think we do have personalities, all sorts of personalities within the teams. And sometimes we think like, introverts are happy to sit at home. They might not. They might actually become even more kind of close, and going on a Zoom call might be difficult for them. And how are you going to embrace that, or all those changes, or the new employees, or someone who is 20 and just starts work, and they've never worked in the company, and suddenly, well, they are great with technology. They have no problem with using all the CRM systems, whatever you have. But do they feel part of the team? So all these things, should be considered.
Yeah, there's probably an opportunity for the well-run and forward-thinking companies to separate themselves from others, especially when you talk about talent, retention and bringing people on. So, okay, thank you very much for both answers on that. So one for Julie. It feels like kind of the genie's out the bottle in respect of kind of agile, flexible working. And obviously most people have been working from home for the last 18 months now. And employees have kind of been forced to introduce new measures and technologies kind of on the fly, especially when everything happened last March, when it was panic stations and no one really knew what was around the corner. So obviously there's a lot of companies that didn't have those kind of flexible remote working platforms and policies in place. So what would your advice be, and what would you say that needs to be done now if people are planning on kind of looking at hybrid working as the new normal?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference, isn't there, between what happened in March last year when we all packed up our desks and expected to be back in the office in a few weeks' time, or possibly a month, and here we are 18 months later in a completely different world. And I think that's the difference, is that all of those measures that were put in place so quickly, they were only ever designed to be temporary. So if you're looking to implement something on a more permanent basis, then it's important that you start from the beginning and you get everything right sort of from the outset. So as Patrycja said, the thing to start off is, speak to staff, speak to them about what's worked and what hasn't worked, and get that feedback, because actually that's really important to start then designing what hybrid working might look like for your business. There's not going to be one size fits all, and it's not going to apply across the board. There might be differences between the roles within the business, the seniority of people, the experience that someone has. So it will all be things to take into account. And when you're thinking about implementing something, think about whether you do it on a trial basis, first of all, just to see how it will work for everybody, and to make sure that you can iron out those issues that will inevitably crop up. One of our attendees has asked actually about a hybrid working policy. And yes, absolutely, I can help you with that. But it's important to have that policy in place, because it sets out what the expectations are for the staff, what the expectations are for the employer. So what happens about equipment, what will be provided, who's responsible for doing that? Are you going to pay for the extra heating and lighting costs? Most employers, I would say, would say no. So think about what your policy will look like. And then have a look at your contracts of employment. And that's really important. They might not have been updated for a little while, in which case give me a call afterwards and we can have a chat. But even if they are up to date, if you're looking to implement hybrid working, there are certain things that you're going to need to change. So somebody's place of work is the obvious one, but you've also got to think about confidentiality, think about the equipment that you'll provide, think about expenses, and all of those things that, like I said, we may have muddled through over the last year, but actually sort of now is the time to formalise it if you're going to use it sort of going forward. And then make sure that your managers have the right skills and the right training to be able to do their job, because it is a different skill base to manage people remotely. So think about that side of things. And then how you're going to monitor the new way of working. How will you monitor whether it's working or not? Make sure that you're looking at it on a regular basis, really just to see, what's still working and what you might need to tweak. And one of the questions actually I've just noticed in the Q&A box was about employees traveling on public transport and there being concern about that. And I think that's understandable. I think that's something that will be something that crops up a lot. As you rightly say, employers can't control what's happening on public transport. And I know certainly a friend of mine that was on a train last week and only 2 people in her carriage had masks on, which made her feel uncomfortable. But everyone has their own view on that. I think when it comes to alleviating concerns about travelling on public transport, have a think about whether somebody could adjust their hours slightly just to avoid the real peak times of commuting. So obviously it has to work for your business, and it has to still mean that you can service your customers, your clients, but can you adjust it so that perhaps somebody either starts a lot earlier and then leaves earlier, or starts later and leaves later? And actually that might be something that's a conversation to be had that might suit their personal life as well. So I think see if you can do that, and then have those conversations about whether you are going to require everyone back to the office on a full-time basis, or whether you're going to consider some sort of hybrid working.
Thank you. So that naturally the world's changed over the last 18 months, taking work out of it, obviously, just the world's been turned on its head, as it were. We never even used to have virtual meetings like this. I mean, it seems alien now to look back, but the fact that we all used to come into the office 5 days a week and sit there for 10 hours or so seems a bit bizarre now looking back. But Patrycja, there's something that I'm quite intrigued by. Obviously, with your expertise, where do you think we're going to be, what kind of work models are we going to be looking at in the future, and what kind of structures do you see kind of coming to the fore in the next 2 to 4 years in this post-pandemic world or mid-pandemic world? I don't know. Hopefully,
no, let's call it post-pandemic.
Trying to be optimistic, we'll call it post-pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, I use the post-pandemic term as well very often, and then catch myself like, well, we are still in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one. It's a difficult one because I think everything is still shaping up, and for many companies, they're still lost. I think remote working has always existed, and as a concept at least, and sometimes as an excuse. Also for some of the employees, but it has never been a sort of a necessity as it is now. And I think COVID has just uncovered that and triggered us to look back and to see like, well, actually, could we do that differently? Even my own company and team, we used to, especially when working with foreign companies, we used to fly, or we used to invite them here to have certain sessions, certain meetings, and right now it actually works when we do it online, and it saves on tickets and cleaner and everything. So we might not be going to that model that we had, but I think many organizations still do not have that very clear vision on how they are going to, or how they should, or what's best for them. Of the model that they want to introduce, and they sort of like leave it to, okay, well, that person is working at home, this person is working in the office, do we keep the office? And they kind of like leave it this way. But I think it's not just the vision, but also the plans. Once we see what could work for us, it's working on that plan. I think hybrid doesn't mean a combination of two, like Julie said. If we leave two models, either you work from home or you work in the office, for our employees, and we give the chance, so we say like, yeah, we go for hybrid, but it's this or that. That might actually not be very attractive, and might, for many people might mean like, okay, well, the office is far away, it's a long commute, and if I have to do that 5 days, I'm not really happy. But on the other hand, like Julie said, many people consider working remotely, not necessarily working from home. So it can be working from the client's office if you work on a project where you don't need to go to your physical office, but maybe you can do it from the client's office if you need to be there for longer. It may be working from a local co-working space. So as long as the tools and the facilities are there, it can be anywhere. For some people, it's working from the nearest by Starbucks. Now, that could potentially pose a question of like, Wi-Fi security and things like that. But I think all these things have to be considered. Also, it's many companies say 2 days in office, 3 days commute. It doesn't have to be like that. That might be seasonal, maybe. For some people, commuting in winter might be more difficult than commuting in the summer. And maybe not necessarily you need to have them all in the office on the same days. Looking at like, all right, well, if we work 3 days a week, do we want the whole team to come on those 3 days? Or maybe do we want to have sort of work teams or different departments coming on the individual days? So trying to look like what's best for our business, and how can we capitalize on the opportunity to redesign that process so it gets us where we want to be. Like we said, offices may become more like hubs. It doesn't have to be necessarily, well, it can be probably used a lot for brainstorming sessions, for client meetings, definitely on all those face-to-face meetings. I mean, Zoom is a great tool. But obviously there are obstacles with, kind of like building trust and that team building. I will talk about that more when we talk about, the technology that can support. But definitely, I mean, nothing's better than a face-to-face meeting. And for some functions that office space might be best. Now, would that be permanent rooms and desks for employees, or maybe hot desking if we hadn't introduced that before? So kind of like looking at all these aspects. I think also I tend to think that a hybrid model, but hybrid not just the two, but a kind of a combination of different work models could accelerate growth. Like we said, it opens up to opportunities to recruit better talent sometimes, maybe to look at the way we recruit people, so redesigning the recruitment process and actually looking at, previously we had jobs on the organigram and different functions, now looking at it more like what needs to be done, what skills we have on board, do we really need to recruit another person head of this or that? Maybe actually it can be redesigned. So I think, you know, having all these things in mind could help to accelerate the business, but provided it's done correctly. So a lot of people, a lot of companies, when COVID hit, they were sort of like, oh my God, what happened? We need to suddenly use technology, use Zoom, use I don't know, implement CRM systems and things like that, which actually it's not innovating, it's a necessity. Now, once we have it, you know, thinking like, oh, we've digitalized and we're like, you know, we caught up with everyone. That doesn't mean that you're future proof, that your business is future proof. It's thinking like, okay, now we have the bare minimum to operate. What can we do to stimulate that growth? So again, we can talk about that when we talk about technology. I think that companies that were hit by COVID most were the ones that didn't revisit and review the processes regularly. So once we find the, you know, the model that we think will work for our business, revisiting that and reviewing constantly and talking to people and redesigning if needed until we find the right one. I think that the points to have in mind, you know, thinking of redesigning where people can deliver the work best and not necessarily in the office, are the most important. Yeah, so have all that in mind, and that could help to actually, you know, improve quite a lot.
Perfect. And I noticed the point you made there was, you know, right at the beginning of the pandemic, there was just a rush to, you know, get onto Zoom, get onto Teams, you know, and obviously I don't know about, well, I'm sure it was for everyone, but it just led to an influx of quizzes, Zoom quizzes, everything was a
You're talking in past tense, we're still doing it.
Well, okay, well, I'm not, I'm boycotting quizzes now, but you know, it was just that kind of, I felt like from all of us, thank you, Valerie, all of a sudden, you know, it just felt like we were constantly on Zoom all day, every day. And that kind of leads to like a Zoom fatigue. Sometimes sitting on Zoom all day can be so much more tiring than just sitting working, you know, and working in the office face to face. So if those platforms, and I think from their share prices, I don't think they're going to be going anywhere, you know, if they're here to stay, what would your advice be to kind of avoid that feeling? And how do you think new technologies, because there's always, you know, when there's challenges, new technologies always step into the breach. How do you think they can help design what will be the modern workplace that is scalable and will support, you know, remote and agile, flexible working? Yeah.
I mean, what I can add to what you said, I mean, you know, about Zooms, I think that's a common, I would say, well, maybe not a mistake. It's just that, you know, once we discovered Zoom and a few other platforms that some companies like, even, you know, for task management, like Trello, for some companies, it was an eye-opener. Oh, we can now optimize the process. Whereas I think these are the basic tools. I think the mistake is that we keep using Zoom for so many things, and it's great. And Zoom is developing the technology even further now to be better. So to kind of like, you know, minimize that Zoom fatigue and you know, give us the tools to I mean, you know, to make it more comfortable. But there is a software for quizzes. there is a software for brainstorming, doesn't always have to be Zoom. So you can kind of like, mix it. And I totally get it. I mean, normally you would have half a day session in company with, I don't know, let's say a discovery workshop or something like that. And half a day face to face is not as tiring as 2 or 3 hours on a Zoom call. It's exhausting, and sometimes you feel like, oh gosh, I need to go for a run or to go out to get some fresh air because the Zoom fatigue hits. I think the most important things to kind of have in mind is, once we provide the right tools, is to ensure that the collaboration actually goes, takes place on those tools. It's not just used because we want to use it and we have it, to make sure that we're using that in the right way when needed. On top of having all those tools, is to making sure that we build the environment and the caring culture for the employees. So it's having that conversations with them, getting feedback, getting the insights. I mean, what Zoom and a couple of our other technology providers are developing right now is trying to implement AI to get that feedback, for example, from the calls, to measure the engagement in the room, to kind of like, get the insights and see. So then you can, once you've got that, well, provided we are finally given that, once they develop, we'd be able to see what happens on those Zoom calls, not just conferences or webinars like that, to see like where the engagement goes, where the room goes, like kind of like, sleeps a bit, but also during the team meetings. It's, I mean, on a Zoom call, it's very difficult to read the room, to see if you've got 30 employees on your screen. It's hard to say how they react to things. Or if you've got a client meeting and you see them, with their head and noting, you think like, oh, they're bored, they're not listening to me. They may be taking notes. So it's, I think, saying like, even saying things that you're doing, saying like, I'm sorry, I will take some notes because you're making important points. That makes that, that kind of, it's a substitute for that body language that we would read being in the room. So that's something that's definitely much more difficult on those calls, and I think it adds up to that Zoom fatigue. So being aware of that and trying others to help by actually sometimes saying those things. Technology goes towards AI, face recognition, face reading, and that goes the way where we probably see improvement in that respect. But right now it is what it is, and that hits. I mean, it's as an employer, I think it's thinking about when to use and how to use that. Is it really needed to use? Is there another quiz night after 3-hour conference and maybe 5 of my employees had, 2-hour meetings with clients, and giving them that Zoom quiz on a Friday night might actually add up to like, we don't want that. So being aware of like, what type of team we have, is it really necessary? Maybe something different would be more welcoming. As an employee or as a person, as an individual on Zoom calls, trying to think of like how I feel, how I react, how I can kind of like make it less stressful for me. There are other solutions that could be used, and I can give a couple of names, for example, for collaboration tools to not just to work better as a team, but also to help the team build the team spirit and the culture. So for example, we've got some tools for employee engagement. I think the company that developed the technology is called Soxoday. The technology code is there are 2 pieces. There's MPOS and Plum. So the MPOS brings the digital kind of workplace to life. It's rewards and recognition system, basically. So it kind of increases the employee engagement. There is some kind of a motivational tool that the teams could use. Plum automates that recognition and reward system. So this one is, I will tell about one that also works in blockchain, which is Motive. And it's a kind of a motivational tool that uses cryptocurrency as a reward system. So you combine Motive app with the Kanban app. And, so for the tasks done, employees are rewarded in cryptocurrency. Other project management tools, that teams can use, so it's probably used widely, Trello, Asana, Monday, and all these. They try to implement and they integrate with others quite well, and they try to implement that kind of like motivational system as well. You've got hit milestones, you can celebrate. A great, because a lot of companies use Zoom for brainstorming sessions, whiteboards, etc. You could use Miro instead. It's like a collaborative whiteboard. So instead of like, you used to have the sticky notes on the board in the room, now you can do it on Miro. Blockchain is quite good in delivering solutions that are, I think, because what we are facing right now is majority of the platforms that we are using are centralized. So it's relying, like even today, we're relying on a third party. So there is this trust between the attendees. But imagine that was a session with a potential client with some, maybe confidential information shared. And we are sharing that over Zoom. Now, how safe is that? We have trust in between the two companies, exchanging information, but we are doing that through the third party. Now, looking at the solutions that the blockchain offers is actually much more secure. Much more, the trust element is now the two parties, not three. So that's less, that's decentralized. So looking in that space as well and looking like, okay, is what we're using secure? Is there something where actually we could benefit more, that is more, provides more flow, more security, and it's also fun and engagement and engaging for the employees. And looking at blockchain, you might want to have a look at the Odin chat, which is odin.chat. It's like a secure messaging platform. So not necessarily, I don't know, having WhatsApp group for employees, but maybe looking at something that is much more secure. Then speaking of those third-party elements involved, on a Zoom, but it's also, and a contract. So if you look in the blockchain space, we have smart contracts where that third party is totally eliminated, and that leaves us more autonomy, more kind of like it's more accurate, it's safer. So that's something that if you haven't heard before, definitely worth checking and looking how that could benefit your company. But whatever we introduce, I think the most important thing to remember is that whatever tech we give people, make sure that they know how to use it, make sure that we're using that for the right purpose and at the right time, that it's really needed and not just implemented because it's cool to have it and some competitors are using that, and making sure that the aspect of culture is kind of like, not forgotten, that actually it works for the benefit of the company, for the benefit of the people, and it's aligned with that vision that you have.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much for that. Very, very detailed on technologies and how we're going to be able to move forward. So just a question from maybe a more legal perspective. So I think what can be quite confusing. So if, say, an employer doesn't implement hybrid working as a firm-wide policy, does that mean that employees can still request flexible working? as they may have been able to do pre-pandemic or pre-COVID to be able to work more flexibly? Is that something they can still request if the firm kind of implement a firm-wide, you're coming back into the office, we're carrying on as normal? Because the introduction of these new terms and terms that were around previously could be quite confusing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. But I think as an employer, you need to be aware that if you don't implement hybrid working, you probably are going to be faced with an influx of flexible working requests, because if you remember, flexible working is a legal right that an employee who's been with you more than 6 months has the legal right to request flexible working. My main comment on this is, if I had £1 for every time somebody said to me that they wanted to work flexibly, and you have a right to request it, not a right to have it. But I think my answer probably now would be slightly different, because what the last 18 months has taught us is that people can work in a more flexible way. So whereas before employers may have dismissed an application for flexible working, post-pandemic, employees are going to have real examples of how it can work and how it has been working. And I think that's the difference now, is that if you do get a formal flexible working request, one, you need to deal with it fairly. You need to consider whether actually they need to make that request, or whether, if you're going to implement hybrid working, whether actually that their request is already covered. And think about, if you're not going to agree it, the reasons why, because you can only refuse a flexible working request on 8 prescribed grounds, and that's really to do with whether the cost to you is something that can't be sort of dealt with, whether it affects your ability to provide the service that you give to your clients, and whether it impacts on the quality and the performance of people generally. So I think, have a look at your flexible working policy, see if it's still sort of fit for purpose in terms of what you need it to do. And bear in mind that actually there are lots of positives to being able to agree a flexible working requests, and not only sort of staff retention and loyalty.
Okay, so I think, Julie, I mean, something I'm quite intrigued by, if we're tackling this kind of return to office from a more, say, logistical perspective, just a couple of questions on that. So firstly, as an employer, what's the best way to manage people who may have long COVID, which, it's not, it's a kind of a new phenomenon coming out from the disease. I struggle to believe that many doctors or GPs will be probably diagnosing it appropriately, because no one really knows the form it takes, or the effects it can have. So as an employer, how would you advise people kind of tackle it?
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're going to struggle to get a definitive answer from any experts, because simply the data just isn't there. Obviously, that's always changing, and with everything to do with COVID, every answer I give is subject to it changing in a week or a month's time. But I think the reality is that there are a huge percentage of people that get COVID that then go on to suffer from long COVID. And long COVID is considered anything that lasts more than 4 weeks. So we're not talking about something that would necessarily be months and months. And I think that's the difference, is that from an employer's point of view, that's difficult to manage, because we might be talking about short-term absences, it might be long-term, or it could be intermittent, because if somebody gets symptoms and there's not necessarily a pattern to their symptoms, that's going to be really difficult to manage. So I think about what you can do as an employer. If you have occupational health, get them involved from the outset, get some advice. But as you said, Jonathan, you're not going to get that specific answer of yes, they have a disability, so yes, you have a legal duty to consider those reasonable adjustments, because it's going to be so difficult to assess at the moment. So I think the ACAS guidance is deal with the individual, and rather than trying to put a label on it to say, yes, they are disabled, so we need to do these things. So I think the first thing is speak to the employee, find out what their concerns are, what they can and can't do, and that will give you a great grounding for what it may look like sort of for you. Think about whether it can be a phased return that you've introduced. Could you be flexible with the hours they work? Could their duties be adapted somehow? And agree to sort of keep that communication open, so that actually something like this, where the symptoms may vary all the time, it's not going to be a one size fits all. And I think that's the difficulty for employers. But ultimately, if you've got somebody who is sort of on long-term absence, ultimately as an employer, you do have the ability to go down potentially a performance sort of capability route if somebody is not able to do the job they're employed to do. But obviously that should be a sort of last resort, really.
I guess a lot of that will be similar. The kind of similar will apply to you. There's probably been an uptick in people's mental health deteriorating, which will probably affect work performance. And I guess it's something for employees to be kind of aware
Absolutely.
of. I think one thing that's, I think, I don't know if it's this camera lighting, but being forced to look at myself for an hour on the screen, I really do need a holiday. And holidays are something else that, how can employers kind of deal with that and mitigate for people making active decisions to maybe go away to places that require quarantine on the way back, or things, or if it's not even against, it's not maybe against their choice or their will, if they go somewhere and the traffic light changes whilst they're abroad and they're forced to quarantine when they come back. Is there anything employers can do? I mean, I can't imagine employers can turn around and ban employers from going to certain countries or prohibit.
No, and I'd like to see an employer turn around and dictate which countries an employee can go on a holiday to. That's just, I can't see that going down very well. So ultimately, I think it's really going to be a question of agreeing in advance what your policy is. So thinking realistically, if somebody has to quarantine on their return, what is going to happen? Are they able to work from home? Because if somebody has to isolate at home after a holiday, fine. If they can work from home, that's great. Fundamentally, if you can't do your job, you're not entitled to be paid. But I think it's a conversation to have in advance of holidays, and obviously we're mid-holiday season now. But I think agree with your staff. Will they be able to take holiday at the last minute? And like you said, Jonathan, if a country changes what colour it is while you're away, that could throw the plan up in the air. But I think the idea is to have those conversations beforehand so that you're ready for that to happen, and also be ready to deal with issues surrounding if they have to go to a quarantine hotel, for example. I mean, the price is obviously going up, I think, later this week or next week, which is just astronomical. So from a compliance point of view, as an employer, do you need to be more concerned about data protection, confidentiality, and all of those really important things that come with someone working away from the office? So I think from a holiday point of view, just have those conversations, decide in advance. If somebody does have to isolate on return, whether that's in a hotel or at home, can they work? If they can't, are you going to agree last minute holiday requests? Are you going to agree time off in lieu, for example, or potentially unpaid leave?
Okay, perfect. And kind of the last question that I've got, it's probably a new phenomenon that's come in the last month or 6 weeks, which has been the so-called Pingdemic, resulting from the wonderfully designed NHS track and trace app. And I know that that's been modified in the last couple of weeks. So you've got a lot more exempt professions, which should result in less people being affected. But it's certainly having a big effect on the kind of retail industry, pubs, restaurants. I've personally had reservations in restaurants, and I've had a call from the restaurant 2-3 days before saying, we're going to have to close for a week. We need to reschedule your reservation. There's places which have waited, especially in that hospitality industry, they've waited a year, 18 months to be able to open their doors fully, and it's just kind of another blow to them. So, how are they meant to cope with that? Obviously, from a legal perspective, or
thank you. I've just noticed the time actually, so I won't cover for too long, but I think it's an important thing. I think it's important that we do cover this, because I don't think any business will probably have been unaffected by the Pingdemic. I don't know if anyone on the webinar, if you're able to put in the chat box whether you've had staff been pinged and whether that's affected your business. I know certainly one of my contacts on LinkedIn last week, I think, had 28% of their staff off having been pinged, and it's just crippling. I think there are lots of commentaries about the Pingdemic hell for businesses. So I think from an employer's point of view, if you have an employee who is pinged and has to self-isolate, again, The difference has now been clarified about if somebody is pinged, they're advised to self-isolate, and the guidance is that they shouldn't attend their workplace. That's very different to being told by test and trace that you must self-isolate, which obviously is a legal duty. So again, I think have those conversations with staff, make sure that the conversation is had. As an employer, you have your health and safety obligations. So, you know, an employee should inform you if they have been pinged. Obviously, there's been lots of stories out there, haven't there, about businesses who have had to have suggested that staff stop using the app and maybe delete it. And I think, you know, the app is not a legal duty. You don't have to use it. But I think with an employer's duty to protect health and safety generally, if you were found to have told employees openly to delete the app and not to use it, that could result in potential sort of, you know, somebody could report you to the health and safety executive if they have concerns about whether that means their workplace is secure. So I think employers need to tread very carefully if they think about that. And again, look at sort of what entitlements people would have. Could somebody use holiday rather than losing pay potentially? If somebody has been told to self-isolate by test and trace, they are entitled to statutory sick pay, but not if they've been pinged. So I think that's the difficulty. And hopefully, as we said, hopefully we can confidently say that we are post-pandemic and that the numbers will carry on falling. But it is something that is still a live issue for people.
Thank you to both Julie and Patrycja for your time today, and thank you also to News on the Block for organising the event. Employers certainly have a lot to think about, and naturally there'll be challenges that crop up when dealing with a whole range of issues when it comes to the pandemic and staff returning to the office. So Julie and Patrycja, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you after this webinar, should you have any questions or if they need any advice?
Yeah, I mean, happy to answer any questions that people have. So the easiest way probably is to find me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, jpclaw.co.uk is the website, or my email, jedmonds@jpclaw.co.uk. And yes, happy to follow up with anybody afterwards.
I'm happy to send out your contact details with the recording if that helps.
Great.
Julie.
Thank you.
If you both send me your email, well, I've got both your emails, but I can add that on to the recording email to everyone that's registered.
That's great, thank you.
They'll all have your contact details if they want to follow up with anything.
Okay, perfect. So
yeah, same with mine.
Yes, both of you.
And lastly, I just wanted to thank everyone who's joined this morning, who made it through the Zoom fatigue, and hopefully learned a lot from these two very qualified and great contributors. So I hope the things we covered in the session were useful, and everyone has a nice day.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your time. Also, thank you obviously to everyone who has joined us today. As I mentioned, sorry, excuse me, the session has been recorded, so I will be sending that out to everyone that's registered this afternoon, along with everybody's contact details. If you're interested in joining any of our future knowledge banks, then you can look at the schedule on the News on the Block website. We've also got some live events coming up, which is really exciting. Can't wait to get back to some live events. But yeah, thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.